Katherine Lawson gripped the train's leather handrail as the locomotive slowed with a piercing whistle, announcing its arrival in Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. The small frontier town appeared through the cloud of steam and dust, a single dirt road lined with weathered buildings, so different from the bustling streets of Boston she'd left behind. Final stop, Redemption Creek. The conductor shouted as Katherine gathered her meager belongings, a carpet bag containing her clothing, a satchel of books, and the letter that had brought her west. The platform was nearly empty except for a gangly boy of about 16 holding a hand-painted sign reading, "Miss Lawson." His freckled face broke into a hesitant smile as she approached. "Miss Lawson, I'm Emmett Edwards, sent to fetch you to the ranch. Pa couldn't come himself on account of." The boy stopped, uncertainty crossing his face. "Well, he's busy with the cattle," Katherine smiled. "Thank you, Emmett." "I appreciate you meeting me." She studied the boy, noting his ill-fitting clothes and the way his eyes darted away when she looked directly at him. "Your father mentioned in his letter that he has 3 sons." Emmett nodded as he took her carpet bag. "Yes, madam. There's me, Tommy, who's 12, and little Sammy, who's just turned 8. He led her to a weathered wagon hitched to 2 horses. "It's about an hour's ride to the ranch." As they traveled away from town, the landscape opened into a vast expanse of rugged, beauty-red rocks and distant mesas under an impossibly blue sky. Katherine had come west to be the private teacher for Jacob Edwards' sons, a recent widower who ran one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. His letter had been brief but desperate, explaining how his wife's death 2 years prior had left a void in his children's education and care. "Pa built a small schoolhouse just for us," Emmett said, breaking the silence. "Used to be Ma taught us our letters and sums, but since she passed." He trailed off, focusing on the reins in his hands. Katherine's heart ached for this family she hadn't yet met. "I'm looking forward to teaching you and your brothers, Emmett." Tommy's excited about it. "Sammy don't remember much about schooling. As for me," he shrugged. "Pa says even a rancher needs to read contracts and figure numbers." The wagon crested a hill, revealing a sprawling ranch below a large main house built of sturdy logs, a barn, bunkhouse, corrals, and in the distance, a small structure Katherine assumed was the schoolhouse. Several cowboys worked in the corrals, breaking horses or mending equipment. "That's the Circle E," Emmett announced with undisguised pride. "Biggest spread in 3 counties." As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty Stetson that shadowed his face. He stood watching their arrival, making no move to greet them. "That's Pa," Emmett whispered, suddenly tense. Jacob Edwards didn't move as Emmett pulled the wagon to a stop. Katherine took a deep breath and straightened her travel-wrinkled skirt before accepting Emmett's help down from the wagon. Up close, Jacob Edwards was imposing, well over 6 feet tall, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the harsh western sun. His dark beard was neatly trimmed, and his eyes, a startling blue, assessed her coolly. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Miss Lawson," he said, his voice deep but controlled, "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite comfortable, Mr. Edwards. Thank you for sending Emmett to meet me." Before Jacob could respond, the front door of the house burst open and 2 boys raced out. The younger one, with a mop of unruly blonde hair, hid behind his father's legs, while the middle boy, clearly Tommy, stood at a respectful distance, curiosity bright in his eyes. "These are my other sons," Jacob said stiffly. "Thomas and Samuel." Katherine smiled warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you both." Tommy stepped forward, extending his hand as he'd clearly been taught. "Are you really going to teach us reading and ciphering, madam?" "Indeed I am, Tommy. And history and geography and perhaps even some Latin if you're interested." The boy's eyes widened. "Latin, like what the doctors and lawyers speak?" "Exactly like that." Jacob cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilkins has prepared your quarters in the east wing of the house. You'll have your privacy, but be close enough to oversee the boys." His tone was businesslike, almost cold. "Meals are at 6, noon, and 6 again. School begins tomorrow at 8 sharp. The boys' previous education has been..." Inconsistent. Katherine met his gaze directly. I understand, Mr. Edwards. I'm here to help. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps surprise at her directness, before he nodded curtly. Emmett will show you to your rooms. Dinner is in an hour. Without another word, Jacob Edwards turned and walked back to the barn, little Sammy trailing after him like a shadow. Don't mind Pa, Tommy said quietly. He ain't been much for talking since Ma died, Mrs. Wilkins, the housekeeper, was a round, motherly woman who immediately took Katherine under her wing. The master had this wing built for his wife when they first settled here, she explained as she showed Katherine to a comfortable suite of rooms. Said a lady needed her own space away from ranch business. Katherine ran her hand over the carved wooden bed frame. It's lovely. Master Jacob's been different since we lost the missus, focused on the ranch, on building something for those boys, but the older woman sighed. He forgets sometimes that boys need more than land and cattle. That's why I'm here, Katherine said with quiet determination. Yes, and thank the Lord for it. Those boys need education, especially little Sammy. He was just 6 when his mama passed, and he's barely spoken since. He doesn't speak. Oh, he can when he must, but mostly he stays quiet, follows his pa around like a little shadow. The master dotes on him in his way, but Mrs. Wilkins smoothed her apron. Well, you'll see for yourself soon enough. Dinner was a strained affair. Jacob sat at the head of the table, responding to his son's occasional comments with brief answers. Katherine attempted conversation several times, but each topic, the ranch, the town, even the weather, seemed to elicit only the most minimal responses from the rancher. Only when Tommy enthusiastically asked about starting school did Jacob's expression soften slightly. Pa, Miss Lawson says we might learn Latin, the boy exclaimed. Jacob's eyes flicked to Katherine. Is that so? Only if they show interest and aptitude for it, she replied. But yes, I believe a classical education has value, even perhaps especially on the frontier. Jacob turned to his youngest. What do you think of that, Sammy? The small boy, who had been silently pushing food around his plate, merely shrugged without looking up. An awkward silence fell until Jacob cleared his throat. I've business to attend to in my study. Boys, mind your manners with Miss Lawson. He stood, nodded curtly to Katherine, and left the dining room. Tommy let out a dramatic sigh. Told you he don't talk much. Doesn't talk much, Katherine corrected gently, and that's all right. Sometimes people need time with their thoughts. Emmett, who had been silent throughout the meal, finally spoke. He wasn't always like this. Before Ma got sick, he used to tell stories and laugh. Now he just works from sunup past sundown. Katherine studied the 3 boys. Emmett trying so hard to be a man, Tommy's barely contained energy and curiosity, and little Sammy's withdrawn silence. Well, tomorrow we begin our lessons, and I have a feeling we're going to learn a great deal from each other. Later that evening, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, Katherine stepped onto the small porch outside her rooms. The night was alive with sounds so different from Boston coyotes calling in the distance, the occasional lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through sage. The sky above was a canopy of stars unlike any she'd seen before. They're brighter out here. She startled at the deep voice, turning to find Jacob Edwards standing a few yards away, his face half illuminated by the light spilling from the house. I didn't mean to frighten you, he said, stepping closer. I saw the light from your window and wanted to ensure everything was satisfactory. Quite satisfactory, thank you. I was just admiring the stars. You're right, they are brighter here. Jacob looked upward. Sarah, my wife, used to say the same thing. She came from Philadelphia originally. His voice had softened at the mention of his late wife. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Edwards. He nodded once, his jaw tight. Thank you for coming all this way, Miss Lawson. The boys need education if they are to have choices in life. May I ask what prompted you to seek a teacher now? It's been 2 years since. Since Sarah died, he finished. Yes, I thought I could manage their learning myself, but the ranch demands much of my time. And recently, Tommy found some of his mother's books and became fixated on reading them. I realized I was failing them in this. You're not failing them, Katherine said gently. You've brought me here to help. Jacob's gaze returned to her face, studying her for a long moment. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm 24, Mr. Edwards, and fully qualified. I taught for 3 years at the Gardner School for Girls in Boston." "What brings a Boston schoolteacher to Arizona territory?" Katherine hesitated. "A desire for adventure, perhaps, and the chance to make a difference where it's truly needed." It wasn't the whole truth. There had also been a broken engagement, a scandal involving her fiancé and her best friend, and the subsequent gossip that had made Boston unbearable. But those details belonged to another life, one she'd left behind on that eastbound train. Jacob seemed to accept her answer. "Well, Miss Lawson, we are in need of your skills here. I'll bid you good night." He placed his hat on his head, tipped it slightly, and disappeared into the darkness. Katherine's first day of teaching began early. She'd spent the previous evening organizing the small schoolhouse, pleased to find it well constructed with a proper blackboard, 6 sturdy desks, room for growth, she thought, and a modest collection of books. She'd arranged everything meticulously, determined to create a proper learning environment. The boys arrived promptly at 8, even little Sammy, though he looked as if he might bolt at any moment. Jacob stood in the doorway, watching as his sons took their seats. "I'll leave you to it, Miss Lawson," he said, then added to his sons, "Mind what you're taught. Education is something no one can take from you." Katherine began by assessing each boy's abilities. Emmett could read simple texts but struggled with more complex material. His mathematics was better, likely from helping with the ranch accounts. Tommy was enthusiastic but scattered, his attention jumping from one thing to another. And Sammy? "Can you read this word for me, Sammy?" she asked gently, pointing to cat in a primer. The small boy stared at the page, his fingers tracing the letters without sound. "It's all right if you're not sure," she encouraged. Sammy looked up at her, then back at the page, but remained silent. "He can do it," Tommy interrupted. "He just doesn't want to." "Tommy," Katherine admonished gently, "everyone learns at their own pace." By lunchtime, Katherine had a clear understanding of the challenges ahead. While the older boys could progress relatively quickly with consistent instruction, Sammy would need special attention to overcome whatever was keeping him from engaging. During the afternoon break, while Emmett and Tommy played catch outside, Sammy remained at his desk, drawing intricate pictures of horses in his notebook. Katherine knelt beside him. "Those are beautiful, Sammy. You've captured the way horses move." The boy glanced up briefly, a flash of pleasure crossing his face before he looked down again. "Would you like to read a story about horses?" she asked. Sammy shrugged, but didn't resist when she placed an illustrated book before him. Katherine began reading aloud, her finger tracking each word. After a few pages, she paused at a simple sentence. "Would you like to try this part?" Sammy stared at the page for a long moment. Then, in a voice so soft she barely heard it, he whispered, "The black horse ran." Katherine contained her excitement, simply nodding. "That's exactly right, Sammy. Shall we continue?" By the end of the day, she had coaxed several more sentences from the boy, each one spoken in that same near whisper, but each representing a victory. When Jacob arrived to collect his sons, Katherine held back Sammy's notebook. "Mr. Edwards, I'd like to show you something." Jacob's expression was guarded as he approached her desk. "Is there a problem with Samuel?" "Not at all, quite the opposite." She opened the notebook to reveal Sammy's drawings. "Your son has a remarkable talent for observation. Look at the detail in these horses, the musculature, the proportion." Jacob stared at the drawings, genuine surprise crossing his features. "I had no idea." He flipped through more pages, each filled with careful sketches of ranch life, cattle, cowboys, the landscape. "He also reads several sentences today," Katherine added quietly. "He has a good foundation, but I suspect he needs patient encouragement." Something shifted in Jacob's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight release of the tension in his jaw. "Sarah used to draw," he said after a moment. "She kept sketchbooks of the ranch, the boys when they were babies." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Lawson." That evening, Katherine observed from her window as Jacob took Sammy to the barn. Through the open barn door, she could see the man kneeling beside his youngest son. showing him something in his hands, a small book, perhaps, or more drawing materials. It was the most engaged she'd seen the rancher with any of his children. Days turned into weeks as Katherine settled into life at the Circle E Ranch. Each morning, she taught the boys reading, writing, mathematics, and history. Each afternoon, she introduced them to science through observation of the natural world around them, or literature through stories that captured their imaginations. Emmett progressed rapidly once he overcame his initial resistance. "Pa says I need to focus on ranching," he confided one day. "And do you want to be a rancher?" Katherine asked. The boy looked startled, as if the question had never occurred to him. "I don't rightly know, madam. It's all I've ever known." "That's why education is so important, Emmett. It opens doors to possibilities you might never have considered." Tommy thrived under structured learning, his natural curiosity finally finding proper channels. And Sammy, quiet, withdrawn Sammy, began to emerge from his shell, speaking more frequently, even raising his hand occasionally to answer questions. The changes in the boys didn't go unnoticed by their father. Katherine often caught Jacob observing her classes from a distance, watching with an unreadable expression as she engaged his sons in learning. Sometimes in the evenings, she would find him reviewing their schoolwork, a slight smile tugging at his lips when he came across a particularly well-done assignment. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after her arrival, Katherine decided to take advantage of the pleasant weather for an outdoor science lesson. She led the boys to a meadow near the creek, where they collected specimens of local plants and insects. "Miss Lawson, look what I found," Tommy called, holding up a peculiar-looking beetle. "Careful now, Tommy. Let's observe without harming it," she cautioned, kneeling beside him to examine his find. A shadow fell over them, and she looked up to find Jacob on horseback, watching the proceedings with curiosity. "Pa." Sammy called out the first time Katherine had heard him raise his voice. "We're doing science," Jacob dismounted, approaching the group with interest. "Is that so?" "Miss Lawson says everything in nature has a purpose," Tommy explained enthusiastically. "Even this beetle, does she now?" Jacob's eyes met Katherine's over his son's head. "It's true," she said, rising to her feet and brushing grass from her skirt. "We're categorizing the local flora and fauna. The boys are quite talented naturalists." "May I join you?" Jacob asked, surprising both Katherine and the boys. "Of course," she replied, trying to hide her pleasure at his interest. For the next hour, Jacob participated in their lesson, showing the boys plants that Native Americans had taught early settlers to use for medicine, pointing out tracks of various animals, and even helping Tommy properly sketch the beetle he'd found. Katherine observed the transformation in him, the stern rancher replaced by a knowledgeable, patient father who clearly loved the land and his sons. As they walked back to the ranch, Emmett and Tommy ran ahead, while Sammy walked between Katherine and Jacob, occasionally slipping his small hand into his father's. "You've accomplished more in a month than I thought possible," Jacob said quietly, "especially with Samuel." Katherine watched the small boy who was now skipping ahead to join his brothers. Children often withdraw when they're in pain. Sometimes they just need someone to listen to their silence. Jacob gave her a thoughtful look. "Is that what you did? Listen to his silence?" "I tried. And I showed him that reading could be a path back to the things he loves, like horses and drawing." They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Jacob spoke again. "I've been too absorbed in my own grief," he admitted. "Focused on the ranch, on providing security for the boys' futures, but missing what they needed in the present." "You were doing your best in impossible circumstances," Katherine said gently. Jacob stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Why did you really come west, Miss Lawson?" "And please the truth this time." Katherine's breath caught at his directness. "I told you, you said you wanted adventure and to make a difference. Both may be true, but they're not the whole truth. I've seen the way you flinch when mail arrives from Boston, the way you change the subject when asked about family back east." She looked away, watching the boys who had reached the ranch yard and were now showing their treasures to one of the cowboys. "You're very observant, Mr. Edwards." Comes with the territory, Katherine sighed. Very well, I was engaged to be married. A week before the wedding, I discovered my fiancé in a compromising position with my closest friend. The memory still stung, though less sharply than before. The scandal was considerable. I found myself the object of pity and gossip, the jilted schoolteacher. When I saw your advertisement seeking a teacher for your sons, it seemed like providence. Jacob was quiet for so long that Katherine finally looked up at him. His expression held no pity, only a kind of respectful understanding. Thank you for your honesty, he said, and for what it's worth, the man was a fool. The unexpected compliment brought warmth to her cheeks. Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Jacob, he said. I think, after a month of teaching my sons and listening to their silences, you might call me Jacob. The next day brought a violent autumn thunderstorm that rattled the windows of the schoolhouse and made concentration difficult. Katherine had just decided to dismiss class early when the door burst open, admitting a drenched ranch hand. Miss Lawson. Mr. Edwards says to bring the boys to the main house right away. Creek's rising fast and he's worried about the schoolhouse. Katherine gathered the boys and their materials quickly, and they made a dash through the downpour to the safety of the main house. They arrived soaked to the skin but laughing at the adventure of it. Mrs. Wilkins clucked over them like a mother hen. Into dry clothes, all of you, before you catch your deaths. Miss Lawson, I've laid out one of the missis's old dresses in your room begging your pardon, but you'll need something dry. An hour later, Katherine descended the stairs feeling self-conscious in Sarah Edwards' dress, a simple blue calico that had required only minor adjustments to fit her slimmer frame. She found Jacob in the parlor, studying the violent weather through the window. The boys are settled with hot chocolate in the kitchen, she said. Jacob turned, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of her in his late wife's dress. Katherine immediately felt uncomfortable. I apologize for the presumption, Mrs. Wilkins suggested. No, Jacob interrupted. Please don't apologize, it's practical and… He hesitated. Sarah would have approved. She was a practical woman. Katherine moved to stand beside him at the window. Outside, rain lashed the buildings and water coursed down the paths between them. Will the creek flood the ranch? No, we're on high enough ground here, but I was concerned about the schoolhouse. It's newer construction and hasn't been tested by such weather. He glanced at her. I didn't want to take chances with you or the boys. Thank you for your consideration. A crack of lightning illuminated the yard, followed immediately by a deafening thunderclap. Katherine jumped involuntarily and Jacob's hand moved to her elbow, steadying her. I've never quite grown accustomed to western storms, she admitted. They seem more immediate than those in Boston. Everything is more immediate out here, Jacob replied, his hand still resting lightly on her arm. The dangers and the beauties alike. Katherine became acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth of his hand through the fabric of the dress, of the scent of leather and soap that clung to him. She stepped away slightly, flustered by her reaction. I should check on the boys, she said. Jacob nodded, letting his hand fall. Of course. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, forcing them to conduct lessons in the dining room of the main house. Katherine found herself distracted by Jacob's occasional presence as he moved through the house attending to ranch business. Twice she caught him paused in the doorway, watching as she guided the boys through their lessons, a thoughtful expression on his face. By the third day, the rain had subsided, but the creek remained high, making the path to the schoolhouse impassable. Katherine continued teaching in the main house, adapting her lessons to the new environment. She was demonstrating a mathematical concept using dried beans when Jacob entered the dining room. I apologize for the interruption, he said, but I thought the boys might benefit from a practical application of their studies. He set a leather-bound ledger on the table. These are the ranch accounts. Emmett, I'd like you to show your brothers and Miss Lawson how we track cattle sales and expenses. Emmett looked surprised but pleased by his father's request. With growing confidence, he explained the system Jacob had taught him, showing how each transaction was recorded and how profits and losses were calculated. That's excellent, Emmett, Katherine praised. You have a good head for figures. Pa taught me, the boy said with obvious pride. Says a man needs to know where his money goes or he won't have it long. Jacob, who had remained to observe, nodded in approval. Miss Lawson, perhaps tomorrow you might show the boys how these same principles apply to the banking system and investments. I have some materials that might be useful. I'd be delighted, Katherine replied, pleased by his engagement in their education. That evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Katherine found Jacob in his study, sorting through a cabinet of papers. I've found those banking materials I mentioned, he said as she entered. My father was a banker in St. Louis before he caught gold fever and headed west. He left me his textbooks and journals. Katherine examined the well-preserved volumes with interest. These are excellent resources. Your father must have been an educated man. He was, Jacob confirmed, leaning against his desk. Wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but I preferred open spaces to counting houses. Still, he made sure I understood finance before he let me strike out on my own. And your wife, you mentioned she was from Philadelphia. A shadow crossed Jacob's face, but not the cloud of grief Katherine had seen in previous weeks when Sarah was mentioned. Daughter of a shipping merchant, well-educated, strong-willed, she scandalized her family by marrying a westward-bound rancher. She must have been quite remarkable. She was. Jacob's eyes held Katherine's. She would have approved of you, I think, your dedication to the boys, your adaptability to this life. Katherine felt a flutter in her chest at his words. I'm honored you think so, it's the truth. He straightened, closing the distance between them slightly. Katherine, may I call you Katherine? She nodded, suddenly breathless at his use of her given name. Katherine, I want to thank you properly for what you've done for my sons. Not just the education, but for bringing life back into this house, for making them laugh again. They're wonderful boys, she said softly. They make it easy. No, Jacob shook his head. It wasn't easy. I've watched you patiently draw Sammy out word by word. I've seen you challenge Emmett when he becomes complacent and channel Tommy's endless energy into productive learning. You've accomplished what I thought impossible. His praise warmed her, but Katherine's innate honesty compelled her to respond. They were ready, Jacob. They were waiting for someone to notice their potential, and you did that when you brought me here. They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Jacob took a half-step closer, then seemed to think better of it, moving back to gather the books from his desk. It's getting late, he said, his voice slightly rough. We should both get some rest. Katherine nodded, accepting the books he handed her. As their fingers brushed in the exchange, she felt a jolt of awareness that both thrilled and frightened her. Good night, Jacob, she said, retreating to the door. Good night, Katherine. As autumn deepened toward winter, life at the Circle E settled into a rhythm. The creek receded, allowing Katherine and the boys to return to the schoolhouse. The ranch preparations for winter occupied much of Jacob's time, but he made a point of visiting their classes at least briefly most days, often bringing real-world problems for the boys to solve using their new knowledge. Katherine found herself looking forward to these visits more than she cared to admit. There was something about Jacob Edwards that drew her: his quiet strength, his devotion to his sons, the intelligence that gleamed in his eyes when they discussed the boys' education. One crisp November afternoon, Jacob arrived at the schoolhouse just as classes were ending. I was hoping you and the boys might join me for a ride, he said. There's something I'd like to show you before the snow comes. The boys responded with enthusiasm, and soon they were all mounted, Sammy riding double with his father, Emmett and Tommy on their own ponies, and Katherine on a gentle mare Jacob had selected for her. They rode for about an hour, climbing into the foothills above the ranch, until they reached a sheltered plateau with a breathtaking view of the valley below. This was Sarah's favorite place, Jacob said as they dismounted. She used to bring her sketchbooks up here. Katherine understood why immediately. The vista was spectacular, the ranch buildings looking like toys from this height, the vast expanse of grassland stretching to distant mountains, the creek winding like a silver ribbon through the landscape. It's beautiful, she breathed. I thought the boys should remember this place, Jacob said quietly, "and that you should see it." While the boys explored the plateau, collecting interesting rocks and pine cones, Jacob spread a blanket on a sunny patch of ground and unpacked a simple picnic that Mrs. Wilkins had prepared. "You've been here nearly 3 months," he observed as they sat watching the boys. "Are you finding ranch life agreeable?" Katherine smiled. "More than agreeable, there's an honesty to life here that I find refreshing after Boston society. And the isolation doesn't trouble you. Most Easterners find our lack of social gatherings difficult. I have the boys for company, Mrs. Wilkins for conversation, and more books than I could read in a year," she replied. "And there's you," she added, then blushed at her boldness. Jacob's eyes warmed. "Yes, there's me." They sat in companionable silence for a moment before he spoke again. "Christmas will be here soon. Is there anything special you'd like to do for the boys? Sarah always made it a festive time." "I'd like to help them prepare a Christmas pageant," Katherine suggested. "They could read passages from Scripture, sing carols, perhaps invite some of the neighboring ranches." "They'd like that," Jacob nodded. "Especially Tommy, he's got a flair for the dramatic. And Sammy could draw illustrations for a program," Katherine added. "His reading has improved so much, Jacob. Yesterday he read an entire page aloud without hesitation," pride shone in Jacob's face. "I heard him reading to his brothers last night after bedtime. Never thought I'd see the day." Katherine noticed Sammy approaching with something clutched in his hand. The boy had transformed over the past months, his eyes now bright with curiosity, his voice, though still quiet, used readily to ask questions and share observations. "Pa, Miss Lawson, look what I found." He opened his palm to reveal a perfect arrowhead of chipped stone. Jacob examined it with appropriate solemnity. "That's a good find, Sammy. The Navajo who lived here before us made those for hunting. Can I keep it?" the boy asked. "Of course. Maybe Miss Lawson can help you learn more about the people who made it." Sammy turned his earnest gaze to Katherine. "Will you, Miss Lawson?" "I'd be delighted," she replied. "We could make it a special project for all three of you." Sammy beamed, then ran off to show his treasure to his brothers. "You've given him his voice back," Jacob said softly. "I'd almost forgotten what his smile looked like." "Children are remarkably resilient," Katherine replied. "They want to thrive, to connect. Sometimes they just need a path forward." Jacob's hand moved to cover hers on the blanket. "You've given all of us a path forward, Katherine." The touch of his hand sent warmth spiraling through her. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to belong here permanently, to be part of this family, to wake each morning to Jacob's blue eyes and the boys' laughter. But caution reasserted itself. Jacob was still grieving his wife, still wearing the wedding band that glinted in the autumn sunlight, and she was an employee hired to educate his sons, not to imagine herself as their mother. Gently, she withdrew her hand. "We should start back soon. The sun sets early these days." Jacob studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right, of course." As November turned to December, the first snows arrived, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland. Katherine threw herself into preparations for the Christmas pageant, working with the boys to select readings and music, helping Sammy create beautiful illustrated programs, and arranging with Mrs. Wilkins to prepare refreshments for their guests. Jacob seemed to catch their enthusiasm, ordering special decorations from town and overseeing the construction of a small stage in the ranch's main gathering room. In the evenings, he often joined them as they practiced, occasionally suggesting a different reading or helping Tommy with a particularly difficult passage. These family evenings became Katherine's most treasured times, sitting near the fire with Jacob as the boys performed their parts, the four of them laughing together over mistakes, sharing the simple joy of creation. Sometimes, when the boys were absorbed in their tasks, she would look up to find Jacob watching her, a warmth in his eyes that made her heart race. One evening, a week before Christmas, Katherine was helping Sammy with his drawing when Jacob entered with an armload of greenery. "Mrs. Wilkins suggested we need decorations," he explained. "The boys and I gathered pine boughs and holly this morning." "It's perfect," Katherine exclaimed. "Boys, shall we take a break from rehearsal to decorate?" Soon the room was filled with the scent of pine as they arranged the greenery along the mantel and wound it around the stair railings. Jacob produced red ribbons from his pocket, and Katherine showed the boys how to fashion simple bows to attach to the boughs. "Pa, can we have a tree like we used to?" Tommy asked, his eyes bright with excitement. A shadow crossed Jacob's face. "I hadn't thought, please, Pa," Sammy added his plea. "Miss Lawson could help us decorate it." Jacob's eyes met Katherine's over the boys' heads. "Would you mind?" It was a tradition Sarah started. "I think it's a wonderful tradition," she replied softly. The next day, Jacob and the boys rode out to find a perfect tree, returning triumphant with a magnificent pine that nearly touched the ceiling of the gathering room. Mrs. Wilkins produced boxes of ornaments from the attic, delicate glass balls, wooden figures carved by Jacob in earlier years, and homemade decorations created by the boys under Sarah's guidance. As they decorated the tree together, the boys shared memories of past Christmases, speaking of their mother with smiles rather than sadness. Katherine watched Jacob carefully, but instead of pain, his face showed a gentle nostalgia, a thankfulness for the memories. "Ma always put this star on top," Emmett said, holding up a silver star carefully wrapped in tissue. Jacob nodded, taking the star and lifting Sammy onto his shoulders so the boy could place it at the pinnacle of the tree. "Perfect," he pronounced when the task was complete. "Your mother would be proud." That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Katherine lingered by the tree, admiring the way the firelight played on the ornaments. She hadn't noticed Jacob's approach until he spoke from just behind her. "Thank you," he said simply. She turned to face him. "For what?" "For helping us remember the joy of Christmas, for making it possible to celebrate again without being overwhelmed by what we've lost." "The boys were ready," she said. "They needed your permission to be happy again." Jacob stepped closer. "And what about you, Katherine? Are you happy here?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Happier than I expected to be, even so far from civilization, from the society you were accustomed to." She smiled. "I've discovered that civilization has little to do with city streets and social engagements. There's more genuine humanity in this ranch than in all of Boston's drawing rooms." Jacob's gaze held hers, searching. "When I wrote that advertisement seeking a teacher, I never imagined finding someone like you, someone who would not only educate my sons but help heal them, help heal all of us." "Jacob," Katherine began, uncertain what she wanted to say. "Please let me finish." He took a deep breath. "I've lived in grief for 2 years, focusing on work and duty, telling myself it was enough. But these past months, watching you with my sons, seeing the light return to their eyes, to Sammy's voice, I've realized something." "What?" she whispered. "That life continues, that joy is still possible." His hand rose to gently touch her cheek. "That my heart isn't as dead as I thought it was." Katherine's breath caught at his touch. "Jacob, I don't want to replace Sarah in your life or in your son's memories." "You couldn't," he said gently. "Nor would I want you to try. Sarah will always be their mother, always be my first love. But Katherine," his voice dropped lower, "I think there might be room in this house in our lives for new love as well." Before she could respond, the sound of small feet on the stairs made them both step apart. Sammy appeared in his nightshirt, his hair tousled from sleep. "I forgot to say good night to the tree," he explained seriously. Jacob chuckled, the tension of the moment breaking. "Well, that's important business. Carry on, son." Sammy solemnly approached the tree, whispered something to it that neither adult could hear, then turned back to them with a smile. "Good night, Pa. Good night, Miss Lawson." "Good night, Sammy," they replied in unison, watching as he padded back upstairs. When he had gone, Jacob turned back to Katherine with a rueful smile. "A father's conversation is never truly private." "No," she agreed, "but perhaps that's for the best tonight. We both have much to consider." Jacob nodded, reaching for her hand and bringing it briefly to his lips. "Until tomorrow, then." The night of the Christmas pageant arrived with perfect winter weather, a light snow falling gently outside while inside the ranch house glowed with warmth and light. Families from neighboring ranches, and even some townspeople from Redemption Creek, had accepted the invitation, filling the gathering room with conversation and laughter. Katherine helped the boys with last-minute preparations, straightening Tommy's collar, assuring a nervous Emmett that he knew his lines perfectly, and admiring Sammy's final drawing for the program cover. "You all look so handsome," she told them, her heart swelling with pride. "You look pretty too, Miss Lawson," Sammy said, touching the sleeve of her best dress, a deep green wool that she'd saved for special occasions. "Thank you, Sammy. Now remember what we practiced. Speak clearly and slowly so everyone can hear you." As the boys took their places, Katherine slipped to the back of the room where Jacob stood greeting the last of their guests. He was dressed in his best, a black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, a crisp white shirt, his beard neatly trimmed. When he saw her, his face lit with a smile that made her heart skip. "They're ready," she told him, "and you've worked wonders," he replied. "Shall we?" The pageant was a triumph. Emmett read the nativity story with dignified clarity. Tommy performed a spirited recitation of Twas the Night Before Christmas that had the audience chuckling. And Sammy, in the moment that brought tears to Katherine's eyes, stood alone and read a passage about the Star of Bethlehem in a clear, confident voice that carried to every corner of the room. When the boys led everyone in Christmas carols to close the performance, Katherine found herself standing beside Jacob, their voices blending as they sang Silent Night. His hand found hers in the dim light, his fingers intertwining with her own as naturally as if they'd been doing so for years. The evening continued with refreshments and conversation. Katherine moved among their guests, accepting compliments for the boys' performance and deflecting credit to the Edwards family. She was speaking with the wife of a neighboring rancher when she felt a tug at her skirt and looked down to find Sammy. "Miss Lawson, Pa wants you to come see something," the boy said importantly. "Excuse me," she said to her companion, allowing Sammy to lead her through the crowd to where Jacob waited near the doorway. "The boys and I have something to show you," Jacob said, his eyes twinkling with suppressed excitement. "It's outside." Curious, Katherine donned her shawl and followed Jacob and the boys onto the porch. There in the yard stood a sleigh hitched to 2 horses, the harnesses adorned with bells that glinted in the lantern light. "A sleigh ride," Tommy exclaimed. "Pa said we could take you." "It was Sammy's idea," Emmett added. "For Christmas." Katherine looked at the small boy who beamed up at her. "You thought of this for me?" Sammy nodded. "Because you like snow, and Pa said he used to take Ma for rides when it snowed, and he hesitated, suddenly shy, and because we love you." Katherine's heart seemed to swell within her chest. She knelt in the snow, opening her arms to Sammy, who rushed into them. "I love you too," she whispered against his hair. "All of you." Jacob helped her into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her and the boys before taking the reins himself. As they glided away from the ranch, the bells jingling merrily in the crisp air, Katherine felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that she'd never experienced before. They rode through the snowy landscape, the boys pointing out landmarks transformed by winter, a frozen pond that would be perfect for skating, a hill ideal for sledding. Jacob guided the horses with confident hands, occasionally glancing at Katherine with a warmth that penetrated the winter chill. When they returned to the ranch, the party was beginning to disperse, guests calling out final Christmas wishes as they departed in their own conveyances. Mrs. Wilkins took charge of the sleepy boys, ushering them upstairs with promises that Santa Claus wouldn't come until they were asleep. Katherine lingered on the porch, watching the last of the guests disappear down the snowy drive. Jacob joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "They were magnificent tonight," she said. "You must be so proud." "I am," he agreed, "of them and of you." The sleigh ride was a beautiful surprise. Jacob smiled. "Sammy has been planning it for weeks. He wanted to do something special for you," he said. Katherine paused, still overwhelmed by the child's words. "He said they love me, they do." Jacob turned to face her fully. "We all do." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, more powerful for its simplicity. "Jacob, wait," he interrupted gently. "Before you say anything, there's something I need to do." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that glinted in his palm. With deliberate movements, he removed the wedding band he had worn for so long and placed it carefully in an inner pocket of his jacket. "Sarah will always be part of me, part of our family," he said quietly. "But it's time to honor her memory by living again, by moving forward." He took Catherine's hand in his. "If you'll have us, all of us, with our grief and our joy, our past and our future." Katherine looked up at the man before her, strong yet gentle, wounded yet healing, a father who had found the courage to love again for the sake of his sons and himself. "I came west seeking a new beginning," she said softly. "I never imagined finding a home, a family." Her fingers tightened around his. "Yes, Jacob, I'll have all of you, just as you are." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned down and touched his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that held both promise and question. Katherine answered by rising on her toes to deepen the kiss, her arms sliding around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Katherine," he whispered. "Merry Christmas, Jacob." From the doorway came a poorly suppressed giggle. They turned to find all three boys watching them with varying expressions, Emmett trying to look mature but failing to hide his grin, Tommy openly delighted, and Sammy with quiet satisfaction. "Are you going to marry Miss Lawson, Pa?" Tommy asked bluntly. Jacob looked at Katherine, one eyebrow raised in question. She felt a bubble of joy rise within her and nodded. "If she'll have me," Jacob replied. "She will," Sammy stated with certainty. Katherine laughed, opening her arms to the boys who rushed to embrace her. As Jacob's arms encircled all of them, she knew she had found what she hadn't even known. She was seeking not just a position or an adventure, but a family, a purpose, a place to belong. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. Katherine woke early, excitement bubbling within her at the day ahead. She dressed quickly in a festive red dress and made her way downstairs to help Mrs. Wilkins with breakfast preparations. To her surprise, Jacob was already in the kitchen, deep in conversation with the housekeeper who was beaming with obvious delight. "Good morning," Katherine said. Both turned, Jacob's face lighting with a smile that made her heart race. "Merry Christmas," he said, crossing to take her hands in his. "I was just telling Mrs. Wilkins our news," he explained. "She's threatened to leave my employ if I don't set a date soon." The older woman laughed. "After 2 years of watching him mope around this house, Miss Lawson, you can hardly blame me for wanting things settled quickly." "I don't blame you at all," Katherine replied with a smile. A thundering on the stairs announced the boys' awakening. They burst into the kitchen in their nightshirts, eyes wide with Christmas excitement. "Has Santa been here?" Tommy demanded. "See for yourself," Jacob directed, pointing toward the gathering room. The boys raced ahead while the adults followed at a more sedate pace. Katherine gasped when she entered the room. Overnight, Jacob had arranged a magnificent display of presents beneath the tree, wrapped packages and unwrapped treasures that made the boys shout with delight. There were new books, wooden toys, warm clothing, and special gifts suited to each boy's interests: a fine leather-bound journal and drawing pencils for Sammy, a telescope for curious Tommy, and for Emmett, a handsome saddle tooled with his initials. "Pa, look," Sammy called, holding up a beautifully illustrated copy of Black Beauty that Katherine had secretly ordered from Boston weeks ago. "Miss Lawson found that for you," Jacob explained. "She thought you might enjoy reading about horses." Sammy rushed to embrace her. "Thank you." "Will you read it with me?" "Of course," she promised. Amid the chaos of unwrapping, Jacob drew Katherine aside. "I have something for you as well," he said quietly, placing a small package in her hand. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a velvet box. Inside nestled a ring not ostentatious but beautifully crafted, a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Jacob explained. "I had it sent from St. Louis. I hope you like it." "It's beautiful," she whispered, blinking back tears. Jacob took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. "A proper engagement until we can be married. The circuit preacher comes through in February. Would that suit you?" "February is perfect," she agreed. "Miss Lawson, you haven't opened our present." Tommy interrupted, thrusting a crudely wrapped package into her hands. Inside, she found a framed drawing clearly Sammy's work showing all three boys with Jacob and Katherine standing together before the ranch house. Beneath it, in careful printing, were the words, "Our family. Do you like it?" Sammy asked anxiously. "I love it," Katherine said, gathering all three boys into her embrace. "It's the most perfect gift I've ever received." Over the boys' heads, her eyes met Jacob's, seeing in them the same overwhelming love and gratitude she felt. From the deepest tragedy had come unexpected joy, a second chance at happiness for all of them. The weeks leading to the wedding flew by in a whirl of preparations and everyday life. Katherine continued teaching the boys. Though now there was a new dimension to their relationship, they were no longer simply teacher and students, but a family in formation. Jacob courted her properly despite their engagement, bringing wildflowers he found on the range, taking her on rides to show her the beauty of winter in the high country, and spending evenings with her by the fire after the boys were in bed, talking of their pasts and planning their future. One evening in late January, as a snowstorm raged outside, they sat together in his study, discussing plans for expanding the schoolhouse. "I thought perhaps we might add another room," Jacob suggested. "As the boys advance in their studies, they might benefit from separate spaces for different subjects." "That's an excellent idea," Katherine agreed, especially if she hesitated, suddenly shy. "If what?" Jacob prompted. "If there might someday be more children to educate," she finished, her cheeks warming. Jacob's eyes darkened with emotion. "Is that something you want, more children?" "Yes," she admitted. "I've always wanted a large family." "But only if you—" He cut off her words with a kiss that left no doubt as to his feelings on the matter. "Nothing would make me happier than filling this house with more children, our children," he said when they parted. "The boys have already asked if they might have a sister." Katherine laughed. "Have they indeed?" Sammy in particular seems taken with the idea. He's been drawing pictures of a little girl with your hair. The thought of a daughter with Jacob brought tears to Katherine's eyes. "I love them so much already," she whispered. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real, that I've found such happiness." Jacob gathered her close. "It's real, Katherine, and well-deserved." February arrived with milder weather, as if nature itself approved of their union. The circuit preacher, Reverend Howard, arrived on schedule, staying at the ranch for several days before the ceremony to become acquainted with the family. "It does my heart good to see life returning to this household," the elderly man told Katherine after observing the family at dinner. "Jacob was a broken man when last I visited." "He's remarkably strong," she replied. "He kept going for his sons even when his own heart was shattered." "And now you've helped put the pieces back together," the Reverend observed with a smile, "a blessing for you all." The wedding day dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Wilkins and the wives of neighboring ranchers had transformed the gathering room with early spring flowers and more of the evergreen boughs that had decorated the Christmas tree. Katherine dressed in a new gown of ivory silk that Jacob had ordered from San Francisco, her hair arranged simply with sprigs of baby's breath. A knock at her door revealed Sammy, resplendent in his Sunday best, a serious expression on his face. "Pa sent me to give you this," he said, holding out a small package. Inside, Katherine found a delicate gold locket. When opened, it revealed miniature drawings, Sammy's work again, of the three boys. "So we can be close to your heart," Sammy explained. Katherine knelt to embrace him, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "You already are, sweetheart, always," Sammy beamed. "Pa says it's time, everyone's waiting." Hand in hand with her soon-to-be youngest son, Katherine descended the stairs to where her future awaited. The gathering room was filled with friends, ranch hands, neighboring families, townsfolk from Redemption Creek. At the far end, before the fire, stood Jacob with Emmett and Tommy beside him, all three handsome in new suits. But it was Jacob's face that captured her attention, the love shining there, the hope, the promise of a future neither of them had expected, but both now embraced with their whole hearts. Reverend Howard conducted a simple, moving ceremony. Katherine and Jacob exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises to honor the past while building a future together, to cherish one another and the family they were creating. When Jacob slipped the wedding band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, he whispered words meant only for her. "You've brought light back to our lives. I'll spend the rest of mine making sure yours is filled with joy." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Jacob's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of the life they would share. Around them, their guests erupted in applause and cheers, none louder than the three boys who now officially had a new mother. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music and dancing, food and laughter. Katherine danced first with her new husband, then with each of her sons, a dignified turn with Emmett, who was nearly as tall as she was, an exuberant romp with Tommy, and a sweet, careful dance with Sammy, who counted the steps under his breath. As the party began to wind down, Jacob found her sitting with Mrs. Wilkins, watching Tommy teach some of the younger children a game he'd invented. "May I steal my wife away?" he asked the housekeeper with a smile. "She's all yours, Mr. Edwards," Mrs. Wilkins replied with a knowing wink. As if there was ever any doubt, Jacob led Katherine onto the porch where the setting sun was painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and rose. "Happy?" he asked, drawing her into the circle of his arms. "Completely," she assured him. "And you?" "More than I ever thought possible again." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you for bringing hope back to this family, for teaching my boys not just to read, but to laugh again." "And thank you," Katherine replied, "for showing me what true love looks like, not the shallow infatuation I thought I knew in Boston, but something deep and real and lasting." From inside came the sound of Sammy's laughter, bright and uninhibited, as his brothers chased him around the gathering room. Jacob smiled at the sound. "Do you hear that? That's the sound of healing, of joy returning, of family," Katherine added, rising on her toes to kiss her husband as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, heralding the beginning of their life together. 5 years later, Katherine Edwards stood on the porch of the Circle E Ranch house, watching as Jacob worked with Emmett in the corral, breaking a spirited young stallion. At 21, Emmett had grown into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same steady temperament and natural way with horses. Beside her, Tommy sat on the porch steps, nose buried in a book about astronomy. At 17, he remained as curious and enthusiastic as ever, though his interests had expanded from simple boyhood fascinations to serious academic pursuits. In the fall, he would be leaving for college in Denver, the first Edwards to pursue higher education, a fact that filled both Jacob and Katherine with immense pride. A tug at her skirt drew Katherine's attention downward. 4-year-old Sarah Elizabeth Edwards, named for both Jacob's first wife and Katherine's mother, looked up with wide blue eyes identical to her father's. "Mama, look what Sammy drew for me." The little girl held up a beautifully detailed sketch of a fairy sitting on a mushroom. "That's lovely, sweetheart," Katherine said, admiring her oldest stepson's work. At 13, Sammy's artistic talents had blossomed under careful nurturing. His drawings now adorned every room in the house and had even won prizes at the territorial fair. From inside the house came the cry of the newest Edwards, 2-month-old James Jacob, named for his grandfather and father. Katherine excused herself to tend to her son, carrying Sarah Elizabeth with her. In the nursery, she found Sammy already there, gently rocking the cradle while sketching the baby's sleeping face. "He's got Pa's chin," the boy observed as Katherine entered. "And your mother's eyes," Katherine added softly. She had made it a point from the beginning to keep Sarah's memory alive and honored in their home. Portraits of the first Mrs. Edwards hung alongside newer family pictures, and the boys spoke freely of their memories. Sammy nodded, adding a few more strokes to his drawing. "Do you think Tommy will really go through with leaving for college?" "I think so," Katherine replied, settling in a rocking chair with Sarah Elizabeth on her lap. "He's excited about the opportunity, though I know he'll miss all of you terribly." "Pa says the ranch will always be here for him if he wants it," Sammy said, But I think Tommy's meant for other things. Catherine smiled at the young man's perceptiveness. And what about you? What do you think you're meant for? Sammy considered this as he continued drawing. I want to keep making art, but I also love the ranch. He looked up with a grin. Pa says maybe I can do both, run cattle and paint landscapes like those artists who come west to capture the territory. That sounds perfect, Catherine agreed. Later that evening, with the children all in bed, Catherine joined Jacob on the porch. The summer air was sweet with sage and pine, and above them, the stars shone with remarkable clarity. Tommy's been pointing out constellations to Sarah Elizabeth, Jacob remarked as Catherine settled beside him on the porch swing. She already knows more astronomy than I ever learned, Catherine laughed. She's determined to keep up with her brothers. This morning she informed me that when she grows up, she's going to run the ranch and write books like the ones I read to her. Jacob's arm tightened around her shoulders. She's got her mother's determination. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moonlight silvering the landscape. I had a letter from the school board in Redemption Creek today, Catherine said eventually. They've asked me to consider teaching at the town school 2 days a week once James is a bit older. Jacob turned to her with interest. Would you like that? I think so, she admitted. I love teaching our children, but there are so many in town with limited opportunities, and with Emmett taking on more responsibility here and Mrs. Wilkins happy to help with the little ones. Then you should do it, Jacob said without hesitation. You've given so much to this family, Catherine. If teaching others would make you happy, you have my full support. Catherine leaned her head against his shoulder. How did I get so fortunate? I ask myself the same question every day, he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. When I think of how close I came to never writing that advertisement, how many times I tore up the draft. It was meant to be, Catherine said simply. From inside came the soft cry of baby James. Catherine moved to rise, but Jacob stopped her. I'll go, he said, brushing a kiss across her lips before heading inside. Catherine remained on the porch, her heart full as she contemplated the journey that had brought her here from heartbreak in Boston to complete joy in this rugged land. She thought of the timid, silent Sammy who now expressed himself so eloquently through both words and art. Of Tommy, whose boundless curiosity would soon take him to new horizons. Of steady Emmett, who had found his purpose in the land his father loved. And she thought of Jacob, the broken man who had learned to love again, who had watched his sons laugh and grow under her guidance and found his own heart healing in the process. When Jacob returned, baby James drowsing against his shoulder, Catherine knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey had led exactly where she was meant to be, home, in the heart of the family she loved, under the vast western sky that had witnessed their healing and their joy. What are you thinking about? Jacob asked, settling beside her again with the sleeping infant cradled in his arms. Catherine smiled, taking in the sight of her husband and youngest child. I was thinking about beginnings, she said, and how sometimes they come disguised as endings. Jacob nodded in understanding, his free hand finding hers, fingers intertwining as naturally as their lives had woven together. I love you, Catherine Edwards, he said simply, and I love you, she replied, now and always. Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the night sky, a fitting benediction for a love that had brought light back to a shadowed house and laughter to the hearts of all who dwelled within.